We'll take questions. Yes, sir.
How broad is the geography when you say the Arab world?
How broad the geography is, the Arab world? The Arab world is officially the countries that are members of the League of Arab States, 22 countries. And these extend all the way from Morocco to the countries of the Gulf, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and include countries of the Mediterranean, Syria and Lebanon, and North Africa, Egypt, of course, and Sudan. However, as Arabs, and in terms of our coverage as Al Jazeera, we know from the telephone calls that we get from people in Scandinavia, for example, and people from the United States, that they are spread out much more than the strict definition of the League of Arab States. Yes, sir.
What should we do about our boys being shot at every day?
The question was, what should we do about our boys being shot at every day?
Sir, I think one of the major problems, one of the biggest mistakes committed by the Americans in Iraq was to dissolve the Iraqi army. Because these were soldiers who were on a salary of somewhere between $15 to $30 a month, which is negligible. They had no particular loyalty to Saddam, and yet they were just left unemployed overnight. And they could have played a great part in securing the country. And I have no doubts that they would have done so with their leaders and officers, because the Iraqi army is a professional army. There are few professional armies in the Arab world. The Iraqi army is one of them. And it's an army with history, and the soldiers obey orders. Some sort of, it's okay to say we have 5,000 policemen now patrolling Baghdad, but you need some kind of a military presence. I think that, yes, there are Iraqi ministers now on the Interim Governing Council, but there are also many Iraqis of high caliber who are just sitting at home doing nothing and have not been asked about where they would like to see their country go, in which direction, and they need to be involved. As a military force, the Americans are bound to run into problems in Iraq. We don't know if it's really remnants of the Baathists who are mounting these operations, or if there are external powers like regional powers who are involved, or if Al-Qaeda is there, as is being said, and that they are infiltrating the borders, which is, to me, is a little bit hard to believe, because Iraq is not that type of a country. And it hasn't been traditionally, where you have religious extremism. It was ruled with an iron fist by Saddam, who tolerated nothing, and therefore there is no tradition of that over there. And Iraq's neighbors need to be engaged also, especially Iran, because Iran feels at risk, threatened by the United States. So what is to stop it? And I'm not saying it's doing so, but what is to stop it from creating problems for America over there? There is no clear-cut answer, sir, but there are many things that can be done. Because I do remember that talks were taking place in Geneva between the Americans and the Iranians. And they broke up because the news about them was leaked. And it seemed to be a coincidence, but it was after that that things started getting hot. in Iraq also. Yes, ma'am. Welcome, sir.
Every couple of weeks I hear how America is waging a war on Islam, usually from other Muslims. How do you feel it's a war on Islam?
No, it's not, but some of the things that politicians over here say are really stupid and counterproductive, like General Boykin's remarks.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, the lady said that every week she hears comments that America is waging a war on Islam. And no, America is not waging a war on Islam, no. But there are things that upset people's sensibilities also over there in the region. But I wonder, the question is, and this could perhaps also answer another part of your question, sir, why is it that we don't hear of the British running into trouble in Iraq? Yes, they control a smaller area of the country, geographically and demographically, but proportionately, they're not having as many incidents. Because, yes, sir.
There are 3 or 4 general areas, and all of our problems are coming from the Baghdad area. I think 3 are
Well, there are problems also in the north of the country.
on the south and the west.
Yes, but the British are also in the south, sir.
Relatively successful.
Say again, please.
Hey, what we hear is those 3 areas are relatively successful. The Arabs are trying to work with us. It's just this Baghdad area.
No, sir, there are incidents also taking place in the north. Yes, the question was that the impression is that the incidents are just taking place in the Baghdad area and not just not in other places. But they're also taking place in, for example, areas around Tikrit, which is in the north of the country. But I don't think it's a question of where they are taking place, because they could take place anywhere. It's just a question of the approach. Now, you are always going to have people who resent the American occupation forces, always. That is a given. I don't think that you would like to see the Mexican army over here or the Canadian army, would you? No, but it's a question of how to positively engage. And at the same time, all this news is coming out every day. However, I read in the Arabic press, and I see from a program that Al Jazeera broadcasts live from Baghdad, that people have gone back to buying and selling things, that life is regaining more of the normal pace than in the immediate aftermath of the war, that there are positive developments taking place there on the ground, which I haven't seen on American media since I've come here. And that is also important to note, because we're talking about being fair and balanced. Yes.
Would you say, with what you just said earlier, would you say that with the media here, as compared to Al Jazeera, that they're focusing more on where you're saying you're trying to get the truth out to the people, would you say the media here is trying to focus on the bad part and not good, is what you said earlier?
Well, in the news business, good news is no news. Right? But that's why features are made. We do feature stories too, not just hard news stories. And there's also a difference. I mean, I see that the CNN that we see in the rest of the world is not the CNN that is available in the United States. In the rest of the world, it's CNN International, with a much more global view and perspective, with deeper analysis of world events.
So in other words, we could have a little bit of a more biased media here.
Could you have more of a biased media? I think it's a narrower view from what I've seen so far over here. Yes?
What does Al Jazeera mean?
What does Al Jazeera mean? Al Jazeera translated means the Island, but the real meaning of it is peninsula, as in the Arabian Peninsula. Yes, sir.
Do you think replacing Arafat might help the peace process?
Do I think that replacing Arafat might help the peace process? Yasser Arafat is the elected leader of the Palestinian people. He's not one of those leaders who took power through a coup d'etat. I think what's important is that when Israel threatened to either expel or kill Arafat, we saw Hamas activists, Hamas that disagrees completely with Yasser Arafat, go out in the street protesting in defense of Yasser Arafat. Arafat, in 1973, at the Palestinian National Council in 1973, Arafat had the PNC in one of the points recognized the two-state solution in 1973. That is also important to note and remember. What is illogical to me is that when Arafat is excluded and ostracized, and then you have a bombing, and he is held responsible. It makes no sense. You exclude the guy, you tell him you're out, and then you say, but you're responsible. That's the answer I have. Yes, sir.
I just want to make a real quick comment. You noted that the state of Arab TV creates a climate of ignorance, but a recent poll shows that in the United States, half the population believes Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. About 1 in 20 can find Iraq on a map. So I just want to let you know you don't have the corner on ignorance in the Arab world. The other comment is when I heard about opposite direction, you're showing Al Jazeera, which is a 2-hour live interactive debate. I said, wow, we don't have that anywhere in the United States. But what I want to ask you about is the word terrorism and how Al Jazeera deals with the word. I know Reuters doesn't use it unless they're quoting somebody, because the one thing you can say about the T word is everybody uses it to describe their enemy, and nobody will ascribe it to themselves. So how do you deal with the T word, Al Jazeera?
We don't use it. Because usually it's reserved to the situation in the Middle East. But why, for example, are the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka not called terrorists? Why are they rebels? Why are the FARC rebels in Colombia rebels and not terrorists? So that's the answer. Can I? Yes, sir.
Do you think, given the number of years that the Iraqi people have been under Saddam Hussein's rule, do you think there's a possibility that they could be a representative government and that it could be formed in a relatively short time, or is that an impossibility?
The question is, do I believe, given the number of years that Saddam Hussein was in power, that the Iraqi people are capable of having a representative government? Yes, of course. Absolutely, because people want nothing more than liberty and freedom and the ability to express themselves. That is the short answer. Of course, it's much more complex than that, because it's then a case of how are they really and truly represented? Are you going to have international observers if you're going to have elections to make sure that they are free and fair elections? There is no vote rigging. But in principle, this desire is there, and the possibility certainly exists. Yes?
I admire your presentation of the situation in the Arab world, especially what the government do with journalists. However, I want you to ask Southern Sudan as an occupied land, like the country you mentioned before. I believe the relations of Africans in Sudan and the Arabs is a very precarious one. We have been fighting for 53 years. And this is not considered well by the Arab world. In fact, they arm the governments of Sudan, irrespective of what they are. Whether they are National Islamic Front, like the current government in Sudan, or communist government, the Arabs have always united behind the race of Arabs. And you know, If you compare the Palestine and Southern Sudan, we have already lost 2 million people the last 20 years, since 1983. And in the Arab world, there's nothing but hypocrisy upon the dying of people in Southern Sudan. They have enslaved them. They have taken women and children. And in the end, what we hear always is, it's not Islam, it's the government. We Arabs or we Muslims, we don't do this. But I have not seen, in particular Jazeera, talking about the ills of an Arab government within the Southern Sudan. And I hear you say, oh my God, what is the West doing to the Arab world? And you also deny that the Southern Sudanese are not being dominated. Intra, or what we call internal colonialism. Since the British left, the Northern Sudanese, who are Arabs in culture, in language, have dominated the country, killed most of them. What is your opinion about that? I wrote your Jazeera a message about 2 weeks ago, and the answer I got was just negative. I would like you to elaborate on that.
It is not true that we don't discuss the situation in Sudan. We discuss it as much as any news organization would when it is in the news. I think that the tremendous advances made in the peace process at the moment, and that the two sides are supposedly close to an agreement. However, if you watch Al Jazeera, you will know that SPLA members have appeared on Al Jazeera and debated issues with representatives of the Sudanese government. And at the same time, I would like you to pose the question to the rest of the international media and tell me how much that conflict, how much attention that conflict has received. To the contrary, even when Al Jazeera does not discuss the situation in southern Sudan or the southerners of Sudan in particular, when the issue is about the internal situation in Sudan, the topic of the South is also raised. If it's current affairs and if it's in the news, we will discuss it. If it's in an Amnesty International report or Human Rights Watch report, we will broadcast it. We are certainly not in league with any side against anybody. Yes, sir.
One thing I wanted to say, you're talking about you showed the bodies of the U.S. soldiers, and you mentioned some things we did in Vietnam, but I mean, even the Hussein sons, they broadcasted their bodies on TV. And also, you touched briefly on like the treatment of women in the Arab world, but my feelings are a theocracy or fanaticism are never going to work, and that's the problem. But I mean, the Quran in itself is open for interpretation in that way. It says that women are different than men and therefore need to be treated differently. I mean, it doesn't say anything about, don't let them read and make them cover their heads, but is it that? I mean, what causes that? I mean, because all over the Arab world they're mistreated.
The second part is, what causes Arab Muslim women to be mistreated?
Right.
Okay. The gentleman made a comment, first of all, that it's not only us who broadcast pictures of KIAs. The Americans decided to release pictures of Saddam Hussein's sons. I suppose that's another point. The second part about women being mistreated. It's customs and traditions that are invoked. the covering of a woman from head to toe, where it's completely, none of her features are distinctive, is got nothing to do with Islam. I mean, Islam, if you want to look at, for example, the pilgrimage, the Hajj in Mecca. Women and men are not segregated. And it's one of the holiest rituals of Islam. Maybe it's when societies feel under threat, the first thing they do is that they try to hide their women and children. I don't agree that women are mistreated. They have the opportunities. Now, in most Arab countries, in every Arab country, except in Saudi Arabia, women are allowed to drive. And they work. And they go to school. The problem is, for example, if you take a country like Morocco, and you go to the rural areas in Morocco, and you have a family, and they have to make choices. Who goes to school? Usually they choose the boy. The girl can sit around at home for, in many times also economic reasons, because they can't afford it, but they think that the boy is going to be able to have a future. This is where real development comes in, when opportunities are afforded. I'm trying to think of the various reasons why, but things in the Quran can be interpreted in more than one way. Yes, of course, they can, but the basics, they cannot be messed with. They are there, and women have their rights. Even, I mean, we have in the Quran the example of the Queen of Sheba, the leader of her people. And a democratic process, actually, in the verses that deal with that, is revealed in that she asks for second opinions and other opinions. And the issue of women of course need to take a bigger role. Right now, even where in countries where they can stand for elections, become candidates, they don't win that many seats. But everything is tied together in this society, unfortunately. It's not just the issue of women because of women. It's the liberation of men's minds.
The ones who were killed and the ones who are in prison right now, especially I'm talking about Tariq Ayoub and his what's happening.
Okay. Two of our reporters, Tariq Ayoub, who was killed in the American bombing of our Baghdad bureau, and Taysir Alouni, who was our correspondent in Afghanistan and is in a Spanish jail. We don't understand what happened with Tariq Ayoub, why he had to die that day. In Afghanistan, we told the Americans where our bureau was located, and it was clearly marked. It's a villa. I had been to that area, and I know what the villas in that area are like. It got bombed. So, when preparations were being made for the Iraq War, we sent a letter to Victoria Clark, I've seen the letter, at the Department of Defense, giving the exact GPS coordinates of our Baghdad bureau. And it was bombed. Something went wrong with the American military that day. Because if you remember, it was also on that same day that the Palestine Hotel in Baghdad was attacked, and journalists were killed there, including journalists from Reuters. An investigation is supposed to have taken place. I don't know, we have not heard anything satisfactory about what happened that day. In the Palestine Hotel, in our bureau, they said that they were taking fire, gunfire from our bureau. And again, I've been to that place, and I know what it's like. There are no emplacements there. That's one. In the Palestine hotel, the first thing that we heard, we were told, is that there was gunfire coming from the lobby. That was the first thing that was said. And they shot up at the 5th or 6th floor. And that's how those journalists got killed. But it is inconceivable to me that the American military would do it on purpose. I find that very hard to believe. But somebody was trigger happy that day. It's the same American military that's right now putting on trial US soldiers for abuse of Iraqi POWs and the murder of one Iraqi POW. But at least this process takes place in the US military. We would like to find out what happened with our dead colleague. Our other colleague, Taysir Allouni, is being charged in Spain with links to Al-Qaeda. We have appointed lawyers for him. And the thing is that he has not been brought to trial and may not be brought to trial for 4 years, but according to Spanish law, he can be in jail for 4 years until he comes to trial.
He's released now. He got released today.
He did today?
Yes.
Good, it tells you how much news I see here. Okay, well, he's out on bail. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Americans often hear in the media referring to the Arab world, why do they hate us? My question is in two parts. First, could you reflect to the Americans the emotions of the Arab world towards the American policy? Second, the American media often blames networks like Al Jazeera in waging this anger towards the U.S. and labeling Al Jazeera as anti-American. Could you reflect on that?
The feelings of the Arab world towards America. America, believe it or not, American policy wasn't always hated in the Arab world. In 1956, when France, Britain, and Israel decided to invade Egypt, President Eisenhower intervened and got them to withdraw. And America was viewed as a hero in the Middle East then, in the Arab world. Today, a lot of animosity towards American foreign policy in the Middle East, in the Arab world, is linked to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because you have Palestinians who live in refugee camps in every Arab country. And here I would also like to tell you that Arab countries also abuse Palestinians. That Palestinian refugees in Lebanon are prevented from taking up more than 50 jobs. That any construction they want to take up in their refugee camps needs a special permit from the Lebanese government, and it's not usually granted. They can't even bring in a nail. That's just to be fair, until you give you the whole picture. But at the same time, with the effective intervention in places like Kosovo and Bosnia, which America says are places of Muslim majorities, were intervened on behalf of the Muslims there, and that point is granted, yes. Why is it not possible to have a positive engagement in the Middle East? Previous US administrations exerted more efforts than we have seen now. The policy of this administration was to disengage, to let them, as they said, talk about it. Well, they're not going to talk about it, they're going to go at each other's throats. And they did, and they are. The fact that people like Warren Christopher and James Baker had intensive rounds of what was called shuttle diplomacy was very important because it showed America paid attention. Even if things did not move forward at a great pace, it showed that America cared, that there is the Secretary of State of the United States of America touring the region, traveling between Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and Amman and Damascus and Riyadh and trying to bring people together, which we have not seen in the same intensity with this administration. It does not help the situation. The American foreign policy, we hear statements also that are encouraging, of course, like the Secretary of State Colin Powell's comments about the security wall that is being built by Israel at the moment, which is grabbing huge chunks of Palestinian land in the process of doing that. Not helpful, and we are engaged with it in serious. But that is why, I mean, the Palestinians and the Arabs are very critical of American foreign policy. But at the same time, some brave leaders need to be encouraged to come up and make their opinions known. Yitzhak Rabin, the late Yitzhak Rabin, was one of the generals who conquered Jerusalem in 1967, who ordered the breaking of Palestinians' bones, limbs during the First Intifada. But when it came to taking a courageous decision for peace, he did it. Which is why we saw that famous handshake in the Rose Garden at the White House. And looking at polls of Palestinians' opinions back then showed that the majority supported this peace process. Now numbers decreased in how many were convinced that it would ultimately work, but that's what the polls showed at the time, that people were hopeful about it. These are the enemies who had come together, and that was the golden era of peace. The absence of statesmen also like King Hussein of Jordan does not help, because King Hussein was influential when he talked to the Americans, when he talked to the Israelis. And again, this is the issue of leadership and why leadership is important. Madam, you have your hand up, yes.
Because I care about probably peace in that area even more than you do.
Possibly more than you do. I care about it a lot. I see Al Jazeera as having a possibly really positive role in this, because what's happening, what I see in the Arab world is it's one-sided story, and there's two sides of the story. So the other side of the story is the mothers in Israel are scared to send their children on a bus to school because somebody's going to blow it up. So this is a chance for Al Jazeera to try to present the human side of the Israelis to the Arabs and help solve the problem, because I think that it's never going to get solved unless both sides hear the humanity of the other side.
Yes, ma'am, I agree with you. And we show the images at funerals of Israeli mothers, tears and crying. And the Israeli journalists and analysts who appear on Al Jazeera that we talk to are given the full freedom to talk in any way that they wish, to express themselves in any way that they want, be it in political terms or military or even in human terms. But we cannot come and voice an opinion. We cannot editorialize. That is not our job, really. Our job is to permit everybody to come out and talk. The news is the facts, that X number of people were killed. Such and such happened. These are the facts that are reported in the news. It is then And also within the news, that's where we have things that are called phonos, where we call somebody, an interviewee, and have them comment on what is happening. Now, and to be completely frank with you, our viewers are not always receptive to hearing the Israeli viewpoint, because they always say, well, look at this and that, and we have been hurt and we have been injured, but the important thing is that the views are there, and they get to hear them, and they hear the exchange, and we try as much as possible to be this bridge. But it's a very long road, and one of the local proverbs is over there is that you cannot clap with one hand. You need two to clap. Yes, sir.
I wanted to commend your organization. I wanted to commend your organization for providing coverage in that area, but I didn't want this evening to pass without noting the courage of U.S. reporters who have attempted to cover the Middle East and have paid, in some cases, with their lives. One of our alums, Terry Anderson, of course, was kidnapped and held in Lebanon for a long time. He had tried, I think, to cover the events there in a balanced way. And then Daniel Pearl, who was murdered recently, is another case of an American reporter trying to do his part to cover the conflict there. Of course, your staff as well has been at risk, but it is very difficult for reporters, even U.S. reporters, to cover that area because it's so dangerous.
I am with you completely, sir, on this. Terry Anderson paid with some of the best years of his life being treated not like a human being by people who are not human beings. And there are always foreign correspondents who come to our area and work under these very difficult circumstances, donning their flak jackets and helmets, and we see them and we talk to them and we respect them a great deal. Danny Pearl, before he went to Pakistan, was in Doha, and we went out to dinner, to lunch. He had Marianne with him, and my wife was with me, and we went out to dinner. So I know Danny, and sat and talked to him, and it was very sad.
We'll take two more questions.
Yes, sir.
Do you think introducing Turkish troops around Baghdad would help
Do I think that the introduction of Turkish troops in Iraq would help? You have to ask the Iraqis. It should not be an issue of this nation or that nation. It should be a collective effort in Iraq. In my view, one of the important things to do in Iraq is to have an international theme to these efforts of reconstruction, of policing, of whatever you want. The United Nations must be more actively involved in Iraq. This is my personal viewpoint. Yes, sir.
Could you say a few words about Iran, the changes that are taking place there?
The question is about Iran and the changes that are taking place there. The Iranian people are not shy about expressing themselves. They have had elections, and they expressed lack of confidence in the conservatives, which is why they elected President Khatami. They remain frustrated at the amount of progress that is being made in Iran, which is why we saw the students on the streets a few days ago. I do remember going to Iran several times, going to the suburbs of Tehran, and seeing graffiti on the walls that says Pink Floyd, the wall. They want change also, and they want to move ahead. And I think that they are capable themselves of making these changes. The problem arises when the regime feels threatened, When the regime feels threatened, the country feels threatened. And the country will rally against external causes. And this will disrupt the process of change. Iranian journalists go to jail. Their newspapers get shut down, which means that there is opposition, it exists, and there is a process that is taking place there. And I believe that it is one of the countries that is also moving forward in the Middle East, at the Middle East's, or the Middle East's slow pace, but it's getting there. One more. Will there ever be peace in the Middle East? I like to hope so.
Thank you, everybody. There's a reception, drinks over there. And we'd also like to thank one more sponsor we forgot to mention at the beginning, the Greenlee School of Journalism and Mass Communication.